Mamdani's proposed budget has scared a lot of people. Homeowners, co-op and condo owners, building owners.
In November of last year, a man stood in front of a crowd in New York City and made a promise. It wasn't a vague talking point. It was a specific, aggressive number, $30 an hour by the year 2030. He called the current minimum wage a form of poverty. He said it plainly, with the absolute certainty of a man who intended to fix it. His name is Zohran Mamdani, and by January, he wasn't just a candidate anymore. He was the mayor of New York City, a 30-year-old Democratic socialist who built his entire career on saying the quiet part out loud. New Yorkers didn't have to guess where he stood. But then, in March, his own political allies on the city council did something you would think he would celebrate. They took his exact campaign promise, turned it into legislative language, and placed the bill directly on his desk. And that is when the music stopped. Because the man who promised $30 an hour suddenly went completely quiet. Today, we are looking at the brutal economic reality sitting underneath that bill. We are connecting the dots between a campaign promise, a terrifying spike in layoffs in another state, and a mayor who just discovered that certainty is very, very expensive. To understand exactly what is happening right now in New York City Hall, we have to look at the timeline, because the timeline is its own confession. Mamdani ran on $30 an hour. No hedging, no qualifiers, just a hard number. And when 12 city council members, led by Sandy Nurse out of Brooklyn, introduced the 30 for Our City bill, it seemed like a victory lap. They put his exact campaign promise into legislation and sent it to his desk. But while that bill was sitting there waiting for the mayor to sign it, the actual ground-level economy of New York City was already bleeding. And this is the part nobody is connecting yet. 4 months before the city council even handed Mamdani the bill, restaurant industry was already hemorrhaging jobs, not from his $30 plan, from the wage hike that came before it. If you run a small business in this city, what happens next isn't theoretical. It is your payroll. The Bureau of Labor Statistics counted actual paychecks that stopped getting issued. The number is 9,800. That is not a projection. It is not a warning from a conservative think tank. By March of this year, New York City restaurants had cut 3.7% of their workforce over the previous 12 months. Full service, limited service. It didn't matter. Roughly 9,800 people who used to have a job in a kitchen or behind a counter simply don't have one anymore. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. This devastation didn't happen because of the $30 an hour plan. The $30 an hour plan hasn't even taken effect. This happened under the wage law that was already on the books, the law that raised the city minimum to $17 an hour. The damage is already done, and the bigger number hasn't even been activated yet. We have seen this movie before, and we mean that literally. Back in 2015, then Governor Andrew Cuomo pushed New York City toward a $15 minimum wage. Same promises, same good intentions. And as the old saying goes, the road to economic ruin is paved with good intentions. The data afterwards wasn't even close. Restaurant job growth in the city had been running at a healthy 7% a year through 2013. But after the wage hikes kicked in, that growth completely collapsed. It dropped to under a single percentage point. In some months, the job count actually went backwards. You don't have to take our word for the human cost of this data. The New York Times ran a piece in 2019 called New York's Vanishing Diners. Investors Business Daily explicitly called it a jobs recession. CBS News reported that restaurants were actively cutting staff hours just to keep the lights on. Down on the Upper West Side, there was a place called The Coffee Shop. It had been open for 28 years. It was an institution, but in 2018, it closed its doors for good. The owner didn't mince words. On the record, to a reporter, they blamed higher rent and the higher minimum wage. 28 years of business, gone. Not because the food changed, not because the neighborhood emptied out, because the math simply stopped working. That is the historical record. That is the foundation upon which Zohran Mamdani is now trying to build a $30 minimum wage. The brutal math of $30 an hour. But here is what makes this moment different from 2015. and it is the part almost nobody is tying together. 3 weeks after the city council put his exact campaign promise on his desk, Mamdani's office was asked a direct question. Does the mayor support this legislation? The answer they gave wasn't the one you would expect from the man who ran on that number. But before we expose what his office actually said, we need to understand what this bill actually does, because it is much bigger than the headline number everyone is repeating. For our city doesn't flip a switch overnight. It phases in. Big employers, those with more than 500 workers, would hit $20 an hour by 2027 and then $30 by 2030. Smaller businesses get a little more runway, reaching $30 by 2032. Sandy Nurse, the council member who wrote the bill, stood outside City Hall and admitted the quiet part herself. She told the crowd, "The math ain't mathing." She said the wages aren't adding up, and she is entirely correct. $17 an hour is a brutally hard number to live on in New York City. Nobody seriously disputes the cost of living crisis. But we have to look at the math from the other side of the counter. Tom Gretsch runs the Queens Chamber of Commerce, and he did this math out loud in public with a reporter's recording running. He okay it down simply, $30 an hour, multiplied by 2,000 hours a year. That is $60,000 in base salary. Add fringe benefits, taxes, and insurance. And Grech asked the obvious question: how can an entry-level person make close to $80,000 in total cost to the business that hires them? Read that math again. An entry-level job costing $80,000. Right now, every single restaurant owner in this city is doing the exact same math on the exact same napkin, and they are all getting the exact same terrifying number. And it's not just restaurant owners saying it. A Harvard Business School analyst found that for every single dollar added to the minimum wage, a restaurant's odds of permanently closing jump by 14%. Going from $17 to $30 is a $13 increase. Even phased in over several years, that is not a rounding error. That is the kind of mathematical shock that closes places like the coffee shop all over again. Except this time, at a scale nobody has fully modeled out. More than 1 million New Yorkers earn at or near the current minimum wage. That is more than a quarter of the entire local workforce. We are looking at a payroll multiplied by 1 million people, sitting on top of an industry that is already losing jobs before the bigger number even lands. The Seattle, California laboratories. And this is where the story stops being just about New York City, because New York isn't the first place to run this experiment. Someone else already did, and the results are sitting in the data for anyone willing to look. Seattle got there first. Different city, same experiment. In 2022, with Seattle's minimum wage at $17.27 an hour, the city's year-end unemployment rate was a manageable 3.6%. But by 2025, after the wage was pushed up to $20.76, that unemployment number had climbed to 4.9%. But that is the whole city. Let's narrow it down. Let's look at King County, specifically at the industries, as that mirror what we are talking about today: accommodation and fast food. In 2024, that sector reported 158 layoffs. In 2025, 1 year later, after the wage hike took hold, it reported 290 layoffs. Put those two numbers side by side, 158, then 290. That is not a gradual scale. That is a 1,223% increase in layoffs year over year in the exact kind of low-margin service jobs this bill is supposed to protect. And Seattle is not an isolated case. When the state of California raised its fast food minimum wage from $16 to $20 in April of 2024, roughly 18,000 workers lost their jobs in the months that immediately followed. 2 different states, 2 different wage laws, and the exact same pattern showing up in the data both times. The jobs disappear. So, here is the question that nobody at the City Hall rally wanted to sit with. If a wage floor rising by about $3.50 in Seattle produced a 1,223% spike in layoffs in one sector alone, what happens in New York City when the jump on the table isn't $3 or $4? but $13. And that is on top of a market that had already shed 9,800 restaurant jobs before this bill was even written. That is no longer a warning. That is a pattern with a body count measured in paychecks. Let that sit for a second. Seattle didn't have a pre-existing wave of restaurant layoffs going on when they raised their wage. New York does. Whatever happened in King County, New York City is starting from a vastly worse position before a single dollar of the new wage takes effect. That is the number sitting underneath every press conference, every rally, and every "the math ain't mathing" soundbite from City Hall. And it is that terrifying data that makes the mayor's silence so much louder than it should be. Because somewhere between the campaign trail and the desk where that bill is currently sitting, something changed. What his office finally said, when a reporter finally pinned them down, is the part of this story almost nobody outside of City Hall has actually read in full. Here is what happened. In March, 12 city council members introduced the exact bill Mamdani ran his campaign on. A reporter asked his office a direct question: does the mayor support this legislation? Yes or no? The answer did not come from Mamdani himself. It came from a spokesperson named Dazio Mendoza. And here is the exact quote: "Because the wording matters." To address the affordability crisis, Mayor Mamdani believes every New Yorker deserves a living wage. As the administration reviews this legislation, he remains committed to using every tool available to bring down the cost of living. Read that statement again. That is 2 sentences of agreement in principle and exactly 0 words of endorsement. Believes every New Yorker deserves a living wage is not the same sentence as "I support this bill." Reviews this legislation is not a yes. It is the kind of careful, calculated, bureaucratic answer you give when you know exactly what you promised, but you are no longer sure you can survive the delivery of it. Compare that to what he said as a candidate, when there was no bill on his desk and no restaurant owners doing the math out loud in front of reporters. Back then, it wasn't reviewing. It wasn't every tool available. It was $30, a number, a date, and absolutely 0 qualifiers. Something happened between the campaign trail and that spokesperson's statement. And it wasn't a change of heart. It was contact with the actual math. The 9,800 jobs already gone, the $80,000 total cost Gretsch laid out in public, the 1,223% layoff spike sitting in Seattle's books. He knew the historical pattern. Every mayor's office has access to the exact same Bureau of Labor Statistics data we just walked through. His advisors are surely watching Seattle's numbers just as closely as we are right now. When you put these 3 pieces together, a pattern emerges that is impossible to unsee. A campaign promise made before any of this math was sitting in front of reporters. A bill 4 months later that turns that promise into actual law. And a mayor who, the moment the bill became real, found a careful way to sound supportive on paper without committing to a single word of it out loud. Sandy Nurse is still out there fighting for it. Tom Gretsch is still out there warning against it. The council still has to vote. And the man whose entire campaign was built on the number 30 is watching from a safe distance, letting other people carry the fight he started. Ask yourself why a politician who never hedged on the campaign trail is hedging now, with the bill sitting right there on his own desk. Once you stop watching the press conferences and start reading the numbers underneath them, the picture becomes clear. The man who called $17 an hour a form of poverty in the world's richest city is now the mayor holding a bill that could fix exactly that. And instead of signing his name to it, he sent a spokesperson to say he believes and is reviewing. Everybody in this story showed their work. Sandy Nurse showed her work. Tom Gretsch showed his work. The Bureau of Labor Statistics showed its work. The Harvard analyst showed their work. The only person not showing their work is the one man whose name was on the promise in the first place. That is not caution. That is a politician who ran on absolute certainty and discovered the moment it became real that certainty is quite expensive. New York already ran this experiment once on a smaller number, and it left restaurants like the coffee shop boarded up after 28 years. This time, the number is almost double, and the man who promised to sign it still hasn't said the word yes.